Wyoming Territory, October 1883. The wind howled hard across the plains that night, dragging with it sleet and dust, and when Rowan Ashford stepped out of his bunkhouse to check the stable doors, he didn't expect to find a woman crouched in the hay with a child wrapped in her arms. She looked up fast, her eyes wide and wild as a cornered doe. Her coat was soaked through, her hair stuck to her cheeks, and her little boy clung to her chest, coughing. Rowan pushed the barn door open wider. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low but firm. She shook her head, pulling the child in closer, like maybe he might take him. "I ain't gonna call the marshal," Rowan said, taking a slow step forward. "But you can't stay buried in hay all night. It's near freezing." The woman hesitated, then stood, legs stiff like she'd been crouched a long time. "Sorry," she said, voice hoarse. "I just needed somewhere dry for him." Rowan took in the small bundle in her arms. The boy was maybe 4 or 5, pale and shivering beneath a threadbare blanket. "You both need a warm fire more than a pile of hay." She flinched like she expected to be told to go. Rowan held her gaze. "You belong in my bed, not my hay." The words came out rougher than he meant, but he didn't take them back. He was not talking about anything improper. God knew he wasn't that kind of man. But his cabin was warm, clean, and safer than a barn in a storm. She needed shelter, and he had it. The woman stared at him, blinking like she wasn't sure she heard right. "I meant," he added softer now, "the cabin's got heat, blankets, a real bed. You and your boy can rest there tonight. I'll sleep out here." She looked like she might cry, but she swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you." He helped her across the yard, shielding them from the wind. The boy, small and silent, had his face buried in her neck, red curls sticking out from under his cap. Inside, the fire was still glowing in the stove. Rowan stoked it up, tossing in split logs, then grabbed the quilt off his own bed and laid it out fresh. She stood awkwardly by the door, holding her son like she still half expected someone to turn them out. "You got names?" Rowan asked gently. She looked down at the boy. "I'm Katherine Sullivan. This is my son, Jesse." Rowan offered a nod. "Rowan Ashford. This is my place." Katherine set Jesse down on the bed. The child didn't speak, just curled under the blanket with a soft sigh. Katherine brushed his damp hair back, her fingers shaking. "Been a rough road?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "My husband died last spring. Consumption. Left us with nothing but debts. We were heading to Laramie. Thought maybe I could find work. But then the wagon broke down 7 miles back." No one stopped. Rowan pulled a stool close to the stove. "You walked 7 miles with a child in this weather?" She nodded, silent. He studied her thin coat, worn boots, and a kind of quiet that came from too many hard days strung together. She wasn't weak, though. There was steel in her, even if it was buried under exhaustion. "You got anyone out west?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just figured. Anywhere might be better than back east." Rowan rubbed his jaw. "You found the Ashford Ranch. It isn't much, but it's dry. You can stay here a few days, at least until the storm breaks." Katherine looked up, eyes shining. "We've already taken too much." "You haven't taken anything," Rowan said, standing. "I offered. You're safe here." She nodded, quickly, and turned back to Jesse, tucking the blanket up under the boy's chin. Rowan stepped out to the barn for the night, taking his bedroll. But even with the hay padded beneath him, he barely slept. Her face kept coming back, those tired eyes. The way she wrapped her arms around her boy like the world had been trying to take him from her. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world cold and gray. Rowan returned to the cabin just after dawn with coffee and eggs in hand. He pushed open the door quietly. Katherine was already up, stoking the stove. Jesse was still asleep, his little body curled on the far end of the bed. "You did not have to sleep in the barn," she said without turning. He shrugged off his coat. "You did not have to walk 7 miles in a storm." She gave a tired smile. He handed her the tin cup. "Breakfast." She took it with both hands. "Thank you." They ate in silence. Then Rowan stood by the window, watching the wind roll over the hills. "You still planning to head for Laramie?" "That was the plan. There's not much work there. Not for a woman alone." Katherine's jaw tightened. "I can clean. So, tend a kitchen. I am not afraid of work." He nodded. "I believe that." She looked up. "Why are you being kind to us?" Rowan met her eyes. "Because you needed help. And because you are braver than most men I have ever met." That made her blink fast. She looked away. Over the next few days, the air warmed and the snow turned to mud. Jesse got stronger, even started talking a little. He followed Rowan around the barn, asking questions about the horses and feed buckets. Rowan answered every one. Katherine watched from the porch sometimes, arms crossed, eyes soft. Rowan caught her looking once. She looked away fast. "You like horses?" Rowan asked Jesse one morning. The boy grinned, nodding hard. "I can teach you to ride. If your mama says yes." Katherine hesitated. Then, "He would like that." Rowan bent down to Jesse's level. "You ever sit a saddle before?" "No," Jesse said, eyes wide. "Well, we will start slow." Later that night, after Jesse fell asleep, Katherine stood at the stove, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "You have been good to us, Rowan. More than I expected from any man." Rowan leaned against the doorframe. "I am not trying to be anything but what I am." "And what is that?" "A man who saw a woman and her boy freezing to death in a barn and did not want to let them go." She held his gaze. "You say things that sound like they mean more than they do. Maybe they do mean more." She turned back to the fire. Rowan stepped closer. "You belong in my bed, Katherine. Not my hay. Not my spare blanket. Not out there trying to survive every day by yourself." She looked at him then, really looked. He said quieter, "I am not asking anything from you. I like you here. You and Jesse. I like hearing him laugh in the barn. I like seeing you on my porch. You make this place feel like more than just dirt and fence posts." Katherine's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She reached out, touched his hand. He closed his fingers around hers. Warm, steady. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered. Rowan nodded. "Good." The snow had melted into soft earth by the 4th morning, leaving the yard damp and the air sharp with thawing sage. Katherine stood at the edge of the porch, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing Jesse's shirt against the washboard Rowan had fetched from the cellar. She worked with quiet focus, her lips pressed together, her hands red from cold water. Rowan watched from the paddock, where Jesse sat astride an old gray mare, his legs barely reaching the sides. The boy's laugh rang out as the horse took slow, careful steps, Rowan leading her by the reins. "You're doing fine, Jesse," Rowan called. "Just keep your hands light. She knows her way better than you do." The boy grinned, teeth missing on one side. "She's not fast. She's not meant to be. Fast comes later." Katherine looked up briefly, then dropped her gaze back to the wash. She hadn't offered more than a few words that morning, but her shoulders were easier than they'd been, and the silence between them felt less like distance and more like space they both understood. After the lesson, Rowan lifted Jesse down and sent him inside to warm up. He leaned against the porch rail, wiping his hands on a rag. "He's got a good seat for his age," he said. Katherine wrung out the shirt. "He's never been on a horse before. Doesn't show." She set the shirt over the line and picked up the next. "You didn't have to teach him." You've got your own work. Rowan tilted his head. There's time. And it's not work I mind. She didn't answer, just twisted the water from a pair of trousers and reached for the clothespins. You always take things on your own shoulders? He asked after a moment. She paused, then glanced at him. What choice is there? None, I suppose, but you don't have to carry all of it alone anymore. She blinked, then looked away. I don't know what to do with kindness that doesn't come with a price. Then maybe it's time you learned. She didn't speak again until the line was heavy with damp clothes and her fingers had stopped shaking. Rowan took the basin from her hands without asking and dumped the water beyond the fence line. By late afternoon, Jesse had fallen asleep on the rug with his arms around a wooden horse Rowan had carved the winter before. Katherine touched the boy's hair absently as she sat nearby, mending a tear in his only other pair of trousers. Rowan poured 2 cups of chicory brew, setting one beside her. You always sew by candlelight? He asked. I didn't want to wake him. Rowan settled into the chair across from her. You come from a town? North of Harrisburg, farm country. My father was a cooper. What brought you west? She didn't look up. A man who said he'd build something with me. I believed him. Rowan waited. He was gentle once, before the coughing started, before the bank letters came. After he passed, I sold what I could. There wasn't much left. He let the silence stretch. I used to sew for the neighbors. I was good at it, she added, quieter. You still are. That earned the smallest smile, quick and private. You miss Pennsylvania? Katherine set the needle down. I miss the smell of the river in spring, and the way the snow settles on the rooftops, but not the way folks look at a widow with no money and a child to feed. Rowan nodded slowly. Out here, folks look at you different. Out here, they don't look at you at all unless you're in their way. Then maybe I'm glad you ended up in mine. Katherine folded the finished trousers and set them aside. You talk like a man who's been alone a long time. I have. She lifted her eyes to his. By choice. Not always. But I learned to get quiet with it. Katherine ran her thumb along the hem she'd just stitched. I don't mind quiet. It's the emptiness that wears you down. Rowan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I don't want this place to feel empty anymore. The fire popped just once in the stove. Jesse stirred in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Katherine's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to start again. Rowan didn't move. You already have. She looked down at her hands, then at her boy. When she finally spoke, it was soft and sure. Maybe you have too. Neither of them said anything else that night, but when Rowan banked the stove and checked the latch on the door, he left the lantern burning low, and Katherine didn't ask him to sleep in the barn. By late November, the hills had turned brittle and brown, and the wind carried a sharper edge that scraped through the cottonwoods and rattled the dry grass. Rowan had hitched the wagon at first light and driven the 6 miles north to the general store, leaving Jesse and Katherine with a list of tasks and a promise to return before sundown. Katherine used the quiet to scrub the floorboards clean of tracked-in mud, then patched the ripped feed sacks Rowan had stacked in the corner. Jesse sat nearby with a scrap of wood and a blunt carving knife Rowan had dulled for him, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. You planning to make a whole ranch out of that piece? She asked, wringing out the rag. No, Jesse said, running the blade along the edge. It's a corral. For my horses. She bent to rinse the bucket. You've got quite the imagination. It's real, he said. I'm gonna have one, with a gate that don't stick. She watched him a moment, the way his small hands worked with care, and felt something settle in her chest she hadn't known was loose. Rowan returned near dusk, boots crusted with frost and the wagon bed creaking under the weight of flour, dried beans, and a large canvas bundle she hadn't expected. "I traded for something extra," he said, lifting the bundle to the porch. Katherine stepped outside, drying her hands on her apron. "What is it?" Rowan unwrapped the canvas. Beneath it lay a bolt of heavy wool in a deep pine green and a set of iron hooks. "For a coat," he said, "or whatever else you need." Katherine touched the fabric. "You didn't need to spend on me." "I didn't," Rowan said. "I spent for the woman raising a boy with nothing but her hands." She held his eyes, then reached for the material. "I'll make us something decent. Jesse needs mittens. You could use a scarf." That night, after Jesse had gone to sleep curled beside the stove with a blanket and his carved horses, Rowan brought in an armful of split juniper and stacked it by the hearth. "I saw a notice tacked outside the store," he said, brushing wood chips from his sleeves. "They're looking for someone to keep the schoolhouse tidy after the winter break." "Here?" Katherine asked, kneeling to mend the stove's seal. "Just south of the river bend. Pays by the month. Not much, but steady." She leaned back on her heels. "You think they'd hire someone like me?" "I think they'd be fools not to. But I also think maybe you don't need to take the first thing offered just to prove you can stand on your own." Katherine stood slowly, brushing ash from her skirt. "I've never had the chance to choose." "You do now." She folded her arms, not in defiance, but like she was holding something fragile. "I'm not used to standing still. There's always been a reason to leave." "You don't have to go anywhere," Rowan said. "Not unless you want to." She looked toward the small bed where Jesse slept, then back at Rowan. "If I stayed, it wouldn't be just for shelter." "I know." She stepped closer, her voice quieter. "And it wouldn't be just for Jesse." Rowan didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out, slow and sure, and brushed an unruly strand of hair from her cheek. "I wouldn't want you here unless it was for all the right reasons." Katherine's breath caught. "And what would those be?" "That you want this," he said. "This place. This quiet. Me." She didn't answer with words. She only nodded once, and in that moment, nothing more needed saying. They stood in the soft light of the stove, the warmth dancing up the walls, the wind curling faintly beneath the door. Outside, the land held still beneath a sky full of stars, and inside, the silence between them changed shape, no longer empty, but full of what might be built with time and care. In the morning, Katherine began cutting the wool. She measured Jesse's hands carefully, then Rowan's shoulders. She stitched with deliberate care, her fingers steady, her gaze calm, and when she looked up, Rowan was already watching her, a quiet promise in his eyes that matched the one growing in her own. The first snow came early in December, soft and slow, painting the hills in quiet white. Rowan was in the far pasture that morning, mending a split fence post near the creek where the ice had started to form along the edges. Katherine watched from the kitchen window, flour dusting her apron as she pressed dough into a tin. Jesse sat at the table behind her, coloring lines into a scrap of stitched cloth with the blue chalk Rowan had brought back last week. "Do you think the snow will stay this time?" Jesse asked. Katherine glanced outside. "If it does, you'll need to wear both pairs of socks." He made a face. "They itch. They keep you warm." Rowan came in just before noon, boots heavy with packed snow and hands red from cold. He stood near the stove to unlace them, the scent of pine pitch and wind clinging to his coat. "There's a herd of mule deer moving through the lower valley," he said. "I might try for one tomorrow. Could use the meat hung before the deep freeze sets in." Katherine lifted the tin into the oven, brushing flour from her palms. "You'll need someone to dress it. I was thinking you might come along. If Jesse stays with Mrs. Kinney." She straightened. "You want me to hunt with you? I've seen how you handle a blade, and I don't like being out there alone this time of year." She studied him, then nodded. If she'll take Jessie for the day, I'll come. The next morning, they left before light, bundled in wool and oilskin, rifles strapped behind the saddle. The snow hadn't crusted yet, still soft under the horses' hooves. They rode in silence for a while, the sky just beginning to gray. "Did you hunt back east?" Rowan asked, his voice low against the hush of the trees. "My father taught me to track. Birds mostly. He preferred traps to bullets." "You shoot well?" "Only when I have to." He gave a slow nod, eyes scanning the tree line. "That might be today." They found the tracks an hour later. 5 deer, maybe 6, moving through the lower grove. Rowan dismounted, tying his mare to a low branch, and Katherine followed suit. They moved careful through the snow, rifles in hand, breath visible in the cold. They spotted them at the ridge, 3 does and 2 yearlings, grazing near a frozen pool. Rowan motioned gently, and Katherine crouched beside him, lining up her sights. He watched her more than the deer, the way her breath slowed, how steady her hands were. She fired clean, and the lead doe dropped where it stood. The others scattered, hooves kicking up snow as they vanished into the trees. Rowan stepped forward and knelt beside the kill. "That was clean." Katherine lowered her rifle. "She fed her family. She'll feed mine." They dressed the carcass together, hands red with work and silence between them that didn't feel empty. When the horse was loaded, they sat side by side on a fallen log to drink water from the canteen. "I used to think I'd never touch a rifle again," Katherine said, eyes on the trees. "After Liam died, I put it away. I didn't want Jessie growing up in a world where everything was fear." Rowan capped the canteen. "You didn't bring fear with you. You brought grit." She looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. "You don't flinch at the things I've done to survive." "Why would I?" he asked. "Survival ain't a thing to apologize for." Katherine's hands curled around the edge of the log. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to be known. Not like this." Rowan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're known here, not just to me. Jessie's made friends. You've got ties. Ones that don't ask anything but truth." She nodded slowly, eyes distant. "That's what scares me." "What?" "The wanting." He looked at her then, really looked at the woman who had walked miles in cold to keep her child alive, who stitched and cooked and hunted beside him, who never asked for more than what she gave. "What if it didn't have to scare you?" he asked. Katherine turned toward him. "What if I said I want to stay, but I don't know how to stop waiting for the ground to fall out from under us? Then I'd say we build something strong enough to hold." She didn't answer right away, but she reached out, fingers brushing his hand, and didn't pull away when he laced his with hers. They rode home slow, the deer packed behind them, the sun dipping low behind the hills. Jessie stood with Mrs. Kinney by the gate when they arrived, waving hard with both hands. Katherine climbed down first, and Jessie ran to her, arms wrapping around her middle. "Did you bring anything?" She crouched beside him. "We'll be eating well for weeks." Rowan watched them from the saddle, his chest full of a quiet he hadn't known in years. That night, Katherine stood at the stove while Rowan cleaned his rifle at the table. Jessie was asleep early, worn out from an afternoon of playing in the snow. "I've never had a day like that," Katherine said without turning. "Like what?" "One that didn't feel borrowed." Rowan set down the cloth. "It wasn't borrowed. It was yours." She turned then and walked to him, slow, without hesitation. She rested her hand on his shoulder, and he reached up to cover it with his own. "I want this," she said. "I want you. I want to stop running." He stood, his hands still on hers. "Then stay. Let's make a life that doesn't need to be outrun." Katherine leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "I'm tired of only surviving." Then let's start living. She kissed him soft, sure, and steady. And when they parted, there was no doubt left between them. Outside, the snow fell again, gentler this time. Inside, the warmth held. Their life, once made of scraped-together hours, had begun to take root, forged not from desperation, but from the kind of choice that came only once you knew what it was to live without. The wedding was small, folded into the stillness of late winter and the hush of snow resting on fence posts. Katherine wore a dress she'd sewn from the leftover wool green, with long sleeves and a row of hand-stitched buttons down the back. Rowan stood beside her in his Sunday coat, stiff at the collar, his hair brushed for once. Jessie held her hand until the preacher called for vows, then stepped back to stand beside Rowan, chin high like he understood the weight of the moment. Mrs. Kinney offered her parlor and warmed cider on the stove. Her 2 old hounds curled beneath the windowsill. Katherine had baked a pie sweetened with the last of the summer preserves, and Rowan brought a jar of wild honey he'd bartered from a trapper back in October. It wasn't fancy, but it was real quiet and steady and full of the kind of truth that didn't need a crowd to know its worth. After the words were spoken and the rings exchanged, plain bands of hammered silver from a tinsmith in Sweetwater, Rowan lifted Katherine's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, eyes never leaving hers. She didn't cry, though her throat tightened. Instead, she smiled, and he smiled back, the kind of smile that belonged to a man who had known what it was to be empty and no longer was. That night, back at the cabin, Katherine lit the lamp while Rowan banked the fire. Jessie had fallen asleep in the Kinneys' spare room, tucked in with a thick quilt and a promise they'd return by morning. The house felt different, though nothing had changed but the shape of their names. The air was warmer, the shadows softer. Katherine turned when she heard Rowan's boots stop behind her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, fingers resting on the table's edge. "I never thought I'd wear another ring. I never thought I'd give one." She turned to face him. "You're not afraid?" "Of what?" "That it could all still slip away." He stepped closer, the lantern glow catching in his eyes. "No, because we built it slow, like laying fence, like mending roof beams. Every part of it earned." She looked up at him, the quiet between them full of breath and promise. "I don't have to run anymore. You've got a home now, you and Jessie, with me." Rowan kissed her then, with the steadiness of a man who knew what he was holding. Her hands settled at his waist, his thumb brushed the line of her cheek. The wind outside curled through the eaves, but inside, all was still. By spring, the land softened under the sun. Jessie helped Rowan turn the soil behind the barn, both of them browned from the wind and sun. Katherine planted potatoes and early turnips, her skirts hitched at the knee, hands deep in the earth. The schoolhouse reopened in April, and the teacher, a young widow from Cheyenne, offered Jessie a place alongside the other children. Katherine packed him a tin each morning with bread and dried apple slices. Rowan built a bench by the porch, where they sat each evening with their hands laced, watching the light stretch longer over the hills. One evening in May, Rowan came in from the barn with a folded square of paper. "Letter came," he said, handing it to Katherine. She opened it slowly. "It's from my sister's boy, back east. Says he's married now. Has a girl of his own. You ever think of writing her?" "I did. Told her I'd found peace." Rowan looked at her. "And have you?" She leaned into his side. "I have." Later that summer, they built a small addition to the cabin, just one room, enough to give Jessie space of his own. Rowan carved a frame for a window, and Katherine sewed curtains from muslin dyed with black walnut. Jessie helped oil the floorboards, proud and covered in streaks of stain. The harvest came, and with it, a gathering of neighbors for cider and music. Katherine played fiddle, her fingers nimble, while Jessie danced barefoot in the dust. Rowan leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, watching them with a heart so full it ached. When the nights cooled again, they brought in the last of the squash and salted the meat from the fall hunt. Katherine hung herbs over the stove, and Jesse pressed his nose to the window each morning, waiting for the first snow. Rowan came in one evening, brushing hay from his sleeves, and found Katherine at the table, writing in a bound ledger. "What's that?" he asked. "Started keeping a record," she said, "of what we plant, what we trade. Figured it's time we think about more than just the season ahead." He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You think we'll still be here, come next spring?" She set her pencil down. "I know we will." He reached for her hand, rough fingers wrapping around hers. "Then that's enough for me." She looked at him, eyes clear and steady. "It's enough for me too." Outside, snow began to fall gentle at first, then thicker, quieting the land in white. Inside, the fire burned low, the shadows danced, and the three of them sat close, wrapped in a warmth they'd built with time, with love, and with the kind of patience that made a home out of hardship. They never left the Ashford ranch. There was no need. What they needed was already there between the furrows of the field, beneath the beams of the cabin, in the laughter of a boy who had once shivered in the cold but now ran barefoot through golden grass. Rowan and Katherine grew older side by side, never apart. Jesse grew tall, strong, and sure, and when he asked Rowan years later what made a place last, Rowan told him the truth. "You build it slow," he said, "and you build it with love."